Hey there. Welcome to a deep dive into Etsy. We've got a really interesting mix of articles and videos you've shared with us.
Yeah.
Looks like you're interested in how Etsy's doing, like business-wise, but also how all the changes are landing with the actual, artists and sellers.
Absolutely.
So,
And it's fascinating how these different threads,
yeah,
we're talking financial performance, seller satisfaction, even AI are all kind of intertwined in Etsy's story.
it's like a real-life business case study, right? Like it's unfolding in front of us.
Totally, yeah.
Okay, so we're going to start with this CNBC YouTube video you sent about Etsy's current state.
Okay.
But before we get into all the details, can you give us the headline?
Sure. So the headline is kind of a paradox.
Okay.
Etsy announced record revenue in 2023, like $2.7 billion.
Wow.
Which sounds amazing.
Right.
But at the same time, the actual value of the stuff sold on the platform, the gross merchandise sales has been dropping.
So they're making more money, but people are buying less.
Yeah, it's really interesting, right?
Yeah. How does
And
that...
it plays into this bigger question of, is Etsy losing its unique identity? Because it's not just sales figures. Their stock price has also fallen over 70% since its peak in 2021.
Okay, so something's up. I mean, back in the day, Etsy was the spot for handmade, one-of-a-kind stuff.
Right.
Happen.
So to understand that, we kind of have to rewind a little bit.
Okay.
Etsy started with this very idealistic vision. Founder Rob Kalin, he wanted to empower artisans and promote conscious consumption.
Yeah.
It was about connecting buyers directly with those independent creators, a far cry from mass-produced goods.
Yeah, I remember when Etsy first started, it felt way more personal than buying something from, a big box store or whatever.
Totally.
Yeah.
And it worked for a while. Etsy was this thriving marketplace
Yeah.
champion for small businesses, artisans, all that. But then we see some turning points, going public in 2015. That brought on a whole new set of pressures.
Oh, yeah, because now they've got to...
Got to keep the shareholders happy.
Right. Prioritize the profit.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's when we see decisions that, maybe in hindsight, chipped away at Etsy's core identity. Take 2013, for example. They made the controversial decision to allow sellers to use outside manufacturers.
Oh, wow.
So suddenly, handmade didn't always mean made by the seller themselves.
I bet that ruffled some feathers.
Huge point of contention, yeah. Sellers like Nicole Aline Legault, she's been on Etsy since 2009, she starts voicing these concerns about the shift in focus. Etsy no longer feels like this, community-driven platform.
Right.
There's this sense that it's becoming more, corporate,
Right.
More about growth at any cost,
Yeah, yeah.
And then Josh Silverman enters the scene as CEO in 2017. And from what I've read, he was all about one thing,
What?
making Etsy profitable.
Right.
That was the goal.
Yeah.
And he didn't waste any time either. One of his first big moves, raising those transaction fees for sellers.
Oh, wow.
And at the same time, launching this whole new subscription model that promises sellers increased visibility and stuff. So
Yeah.
it's this 1-2 punch that sparks immediate controversy.
Yeah.
Many sellers are, feeling the squeeze.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So those are some pretty big moves, right off the bat. Did they work? Did Etsy actually become profitable under Silverman?
Well, it's a little more complicated than that.
Okay.
You got to remember, the pandemic hit right in this time period.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Which was a game changer for all these online businesses, right? Etsy included.
Yeah.
I mean, suddenly everyone's buying homemade masks.
Oh, yeah.
Remember that?
Totally, yeah.
Yeah.
Got a couple on Etsy back then.
Exactly. Everyone and their grandmother was on Etsy.
Right.
And in 2020 alone, their gross merchandise sales more than doubled.
Wow.
Their stock price up to an all-time high that year.
So Silverman comes in, makes these changes, the pandemic hits, and suddenly Etsy's a Wall Street darling.
Well, at least for a little while,
Right.
What goes up must come down.
Right.
The post-pandemic slowdown, kind of inevitable, right?
Yeah.
People go back out into the world. That insane growth Etsy experienced starts to fizzle out.
Right.
And those fee increases Silverman put in place,
Yeah.
they really started to hurt the sellers, especially when their profits are shrinking too.
Right. So you've got investors who are expecting constant growth, and then the sellers who feel like they're the ones who have to make that happen.
Exactly. And that tension that you're talking about, that's at the heart of a lot of the criticism Etsy's dealing with.
Okay.
And things really came to a head with the formation of the Indie Sellers Guild.
Okay.
This is a group, they've been very vocal, they say. Etsy's putting profits ahead of, like, the well-being of their sellers.
Which, I mean, you think they would want to keep the sellers happy?
You think so, right?
Because without them, there is no Etsy.
Exactly. I mean, it's a symbiotic relationship, or it's supposed to be.
Yeah.
And it's just interesting because Etsy seems really caught between this original goal of supporting these artists, but also having to answer to shareholders.
Right, because they're a publicly traded company now.
Exactly.
Okay, so where does this whole junkification of Etsy come in?
Oh, yeah.
I keep seeing people talking about that.
The junkification debate, yeah. It's another layer to all of this.
Okay.
So remember when Etsy allowed outside manufacturing back in 2013?
Right, yeah.
That kind of opened the floodgates for what some sellers see as all this mass-produced stuff,
Okay.
generic items taking over the platform.
Right.
And it's led to this ongoing debate about, like, what even is handmade anymore?
Yeah, it's like, what does that even mean? Especially nowadays.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And to be fair, Etsy hasn't exactly been clear on this.
Right.
But they're kind of being forced to talk about it, especially after that video.
Oh, right. The TikTok video
Yes.
by Nicole Legup.
Right. She's the one who called out all those dropshipping shops.
That's the one.
And it really seemed to hit a nerve.
Yeah, it definitely went viral.
Suddenly everyone's talking about it, like, has Etsy strayed too far? Have they lost their way?
Interesting. So how did Etsy respond to all this?
Right, what did they do?
Well, they admitted that their definition of handmade was, pretty broad,
Okay.
and they promised to clarify the rules,
Okay.
try to be more transparent about what's actually allowed,
Okay.
but will it be enough?
Right.
That's the question.
Yeah, I mean, will it satisfy the sellers?
Exactly.
It's interesting how, like, at the end of the day, a lot of this seems to come down to them trying to compete with Amazon and these huge companies.
It's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah.
Etsy's trying to play in this space.
Right.
And it's dominated by these giants
Yep.
with way more resources. I mean, they've been they're upping their marketing, trying to get new buyers,
Yeah.
trying to get those repeat customers.
Yeah.
But, I mean, talk about David and Goliath. Right. And then on top of that, you've got these activist investors like Elliott Management.
Right.
They've got like, what, a 13% stake in the company now?
Yeah, 13%, that's huge.
Yeah, it's not nothing.
And not only that, but they have a seat at the table now, you know?
Right. They're on the board.
They're on the board. They have a say in the future of Etsy.
Wow. So how does that work?
So these activist investors, they're all about the bottom line.
Okay.
They want to see those profits.
Right. So that doesn't always line up with keeping the sellers happy.
Not always, no.
Interesting.
High-stakes game of chess.
Yeah.
Every move has these ripple effects.
So where do you think this is going? Like, what's your prediction for the future of Etsy?
It's really hard to say, but I do think that, the next few years are going to be make or break for them.
Right.
Can they make everyone happy? Can they keep the investors happy? Can they keep the sellers happy?
Yeah, yeah.
Can they, fix this whole junkification issue, but also still be, attractive to customers?
Right.
Or do they need to completely change things up?
Wow. Yeah, so many questions.
So many questions.
But I mean, one thing's for sure, the future of Etsy is totally up in the air.
Right. And I think it's almost like a good reminder,
Yeah.
Even in the digital age, it's not all about algorithms and, how much money you're spending on marketing. It's
Right.
about people
Yeah.
and values,
Totally, yeah.
Finding that balance in a world that's always changing.
Right. And finding that balance between, what's good for the business versus what's good for, the people who are actually making the stuff.
Absolutely.
It's interesting.
For sure.
So for you, dear listener, I think, after this deep dive,
Yeah.
there are some interesting things to think about here, right?
Totally.
Like, how much does it matter to you when you're shopping online?
Yeah.
Where something comes from?
Right.
Do you try to support independent artists?
Right. Do you go out of your way, even if it costs a little more?
Yeah, do you put your money where your mouth is, so to speak?
Exactly.
Or is it more about convenience and find the best deal?
Yeah. Is it about price?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's just something to think about, next time you're scrolling through Etsy
Totally.
or really any of these websites where you're buying stuff, right?
Absolutely. Because like we were saying earlier, it's our choices that really shape how these companies,
Oh, yeah.
the direction they go in.
Exactly. Yeah.
For individual decisions have a ripple effect.
It all matters. And on that note, that wraps up our deep dive into Etsy. We hope you found it interesting, and thanks for being here.
Thanks for listening.